A Simple Act of Kindness by Sundar Pichai. Arvind, Krishna, and Lakhmi Pichai were amazed. The story begins on a quiet evening in a small conference hall where many leaders had gathered. The room was filled with soft voices, the sound of people greeting one another, and the faint clink of teacups placed on polished wooden tables. Everyone seemed busy, yet something about the atmosphere felt heavy, as if people were waiting for a moment that had not yet arrived. In the middle of the hall sat Sundar Pichai, calm and gentle as always. He was not trying to draw attention to himself. He never did. Instead, he listened quietly as others spoke. Many people respected him for his success, but what often surprised them more was his humility. Sundar did not act like someone who carried the weight of one of the largest companies in the world. He acted like an ordinary person who cared about others. Arvind Krishna was present too, seated only a few chairs away. As the CEO of another great company, he was known for his intelligence and strength. Yet in this room, he was not thinking about competition or achievements. His eyes kept wandering, observing the way Sundar carried himself. There was something unusual about Sundar, something that made people pause and feel safe around him. And then there was Lakhmi Pichai, Sundar's mother. She had come to this gathering quietly without expecting anyone to notice her. She sat in the back, wearing a simple sari, her hands folded in her lap. Though she was not a leader of any company, her presence carried its own dignity. She was a reminder of Sundar's roots, of where his values had come from. The first moments of the evening passed peacefully, but then a small situation unfolded that none of them would forget. A young server walked by carrying a tray of hot tea. He was nervous, his hands slightly shaking, and before he could steady himself, one of the cups slipped and spilled near the floor close to Lakhmi Pichai's chair. The sound of the cup hitting. The ground startled the room. Conversations paused. The boy froze, fear in his eyes, expecting anger or scolding. The carpet was stained, and everyone knew the organizers would not be happy. In that silence, Sundar Pichai stood up. He did not hesitate, nor did he look irritated. He walked calmly toward the boy, bent down, and began picking up the pieces of the broken cup with his own hands. The boy tried to stop him, whispering apologies again and again, but Sundar shook his head gently. "It's okay," Sundar said in a soft voice. "Mistakes happen. You don't need to worry." The boy's eyes filled with tears. He had expected punishment, but instead he was met with kindness. Sundar then took a napkin, wiped the small spill, and placed the broken pieces carefully on the tray so that the boy would not cut his hands. The room was silent, watching every movement. Arvind Krishna leaned forward, his face filled with surprise. He had seen many leaders in his life, but rarely had he seen one bend down to clean up after someone else. It was such a small act, yet it carried a weight that touched everyone in the hall. Lakhmi Pichai watched her son quietly, her eyes glistening with pride. She remembered the lessons she had taught him when he was a child, lessons about respect, humility, and treating others with kindness, no matter their position. In that moment, she felt those lessons shining through him. After Sundar finished, he patted the young server on the shoulder and gave him a reassuring smile. "You are doing well," he said gently. "Don't let one mistake trouble you." The boy nodded, unable to speak, but his heart was lifted. The people around the hall began whispering, not about the accident, but about Sundar's kindness. It was such a simple act, yet it held a power that words could not capture. Arvind Krishna felt a deep respect rise within him. He thought about how often people measure greatness by titles, wealth, or influence. Yet here, greatness revealed itself through humility and kindness. He could not help but admire Sundar even more. The evening continued, but the moment stayed, alive in everyone's mind. Each time someone looked at Sundar, they did not see just a CEO. They saw a man who carried respect for every person, no matter how small the role. Later, when the meeting ended, Arvind Krishna walked quietly toward Lakhmi Pichai. He bowed his head slightly and said, "Madam, today I understood why your son is the way he is. It is because of you. The values you gave him are stronger than any title." Lakhmi smiled softly. She did not speak many words, but her heart was full. She looked at Sundar from across the room and thought to herself that sometimes the smallest act could reveal the biggest truth about a person. And so, the night closed with a simple act of kindness that touched every soul present. But none of them knew then that this act would lead to a chain of events filled with emotion, unexpected turns, and lessons that would stay with them forever. The silence that spoke louder than words, the following morning. The memory of Sundar's quiet act still lingered in the hearts of those who had seen it. People spoke softly about it, as if it were not just an action but a message. They wondered how a man at the top of the world's technology could bow so easily to pick up broken pieces from the floor. Yet for Sundar, it had not been an effort. It had been natural, something he had learned long ago from his mother's teachings. Arvind Krishna, however, could not let the thought rest. He kept replaying the scene in his mind. It was not about the tea, the carpet, or even the young server. It was about the silence in the room when Sundar bent down. That silence carried weight. It revealed something deeper about human nature, the way humility could disarm fear, the way kindness could replace shame with hope. Arvind was a man who had built his life on strength and intelligence. He was respected in every corner of his industry. But as he sat in his office that morning, looking out the tall glass windows, he felt a strange question rise within him. What does it mean to be truly great? Was it about leading millions of employees, signing billion-dollar deals, or making the world respect your decisions? Or was it about stooping down to lift someone else up? Later that day, he decided to meet Sundar personally. When he entered the simple room where Sundar sat, he was surprised to see Sundar writing notes by hand. There was no crowd, no assistants rushing in and out. It was quiet, and Sundar looked up with the same gentle smile he always carried. "Arvind," Sundar said, "please sit." Arvind nodded and sat opposite him. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. It was not an awkward silence, but a meaningful one. It felt as if words would disturb something delicate between them. Finally, Arvind broke the silence. "Yesterday, what you did with the young server, it touched me. I have seen many leaders, but rarely have I seen something like that. May I ask, why did you do it yourself?" "You could have asked anyone." Sundar looked down for a moment, then raised his eyes slowly. "My mother always told me," he began, "that respect is not about who you are, but how you treat others. I never forgot her words. She used to say, if you want to see a person's real nature, watch how they treat those who cannot give them anything in return." Yesterday, I simply remembered her teachings. Arvind listened closely. His heart stirred at those words. In that instant, he glanced toward the doorway and saw Lakhmi Pichai standing there quietly. She had not entered, but her presence filled the room. She smiled softly, as though she knew her son's words were only an echo of her own lessons. "Madam," Arvind said respectfully, rising to his feet, "you are the true foundation behind him. It is rare to meet someone whose values shine through so clearly in their children." Lakhmi stepped forward slowly and replied with kindness. "Every mother hopes her child carries not her words but her heart." Sundar listened, and that makes me proud. Arvind sat back down, but his chest felt heavy, as though something deep had awakened inside him. He thought about his own journey, the long nights of work, the countless sacrifices, the hard decisions he had made. He had achieved much, but had he forgotten the softer side of leadership? the side that lifted others rather than only led them? Just then, a knock came at the door. The same young server who had spilled the tea the previous night entered hesitantly, holding a tray again. This time his hands were steady. His eyes met Sundar's with quiet gratitude, and he placed the cups gently on the table. No words were spoken, but everyone in the room could feel it. The boy carried a new strength within him, born from the kindness he had received. Sundar took a cup and offered another to Arvind. "Sometimes," Sundar said softly, "it is not about what we build in the world. It is about what we build in people." The words sank into Arvind's heart like a seed planted in fertile soil. He realized then that greatness was not only measured by buildings, markets, or titles. Greatness was hidden in small acts that changed how someone felt about themselves. Outside the window, the city rushed on, unaware of the quiet lesson unfolding in that simple room. But inside, Arvind felt something shifting. He could not yet name it, but he knew this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge not only his thoughts, but his very way of living. And so, with the tea warming their hands and silence, speaking louder than words, the bond between Sundar, Arvind, and Lakhmi grew stronger. But they did not know that the coming days would bring challenges that would test these values in ways none of them expected. When respect was tested, the days passed quietly after that meeting, yet the memory of Sundar's act kept circling in Arvind Krishna's mind. He found himself questioning many things he had once accepted without thought. In the world of business, he had always believed that respect was earned through power, results, and sharp decision-making. But now he wondered if real respect was something softer, something that came not from fear but from kindness. One afternoon, both Sundar and Arvind were invited to a private discussion with several other leaders. The topic was about the future of technology. But as soon as they entered the hall, they sensed an uneasy tension in the air. Some of the leaders there were proud, protective of their influence, and quick to judge. Among them was a man named Raghav, known for his harsh tongue and arrogance. Raghav had never been fond of Sundar's calm way of speaking. He believed that power should be shown loudly, not carried quietly. As soon as Sundar entered, Raghav's eyes narrowed. He leaned back in his chair with a mocking smile, waiting for the right moment to test Sundar. The discussion began, and while others spoke with force, Sundar listened with patience. He gave thoughtful answers, never raising his voice, never dismissing anyone. Arvind noticed how people leaned in when Sundar finally spoke. It was not because his voice was loud, but because his words carried weight. But then the moment came. Raghav, with a sharp tone, interrupted Sundar mid-sentence. "You always speak of humility and kindness," he said, smirking. "Tell me, Sundar, do you really believe that softness can guide a world driven by competition? Do you think people respect you for kindness, or do they simply use it to walk over you?" The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Sundar. Some expected him to ignore the insult, others waited for him to defend himself with pride. Arvind's heart tensed. This was the test. Sundar looked at Raghav calmly, his face steady. "Respect built on fear fades," he replied softly. "But respect built on trust remains. Kindness is not weakness. It is strength that refuses to harm even when it has the power to do so." Raghav laughed bitterly. "Easy words. But in the real world, power rules." Before Sundar could answer, something unexpected happened. Lakhmi Pichai, who had been quietly sitting in the back of the hall, stood up. Her presence drew everyone's attention. She spoke in a voice steady and clear, though not loud. "When my son was young," she said, "he once gave his seat on a crowded bus to an old man who could barely stand. Others laughed at him, saying he was foolish, saying he would be left behind. But the old man blessed him with tears in his eyes. Today, The people who laughed are forgotten, but the old man's blessing still lives in my son's heart. Tell me, Raghav, which is stronger? Laughter that fades or blessings that last forever? The hall grew quiet. No one moved. Sundar lowered his eyes with humility, while Arvind felt a rush of emotion. It was not just Sundar's answer now. It was his mother's presence, her truth, her lived wisdom. Raghav's smile faltered. He opened his mouth as if to speak again, but the silence in the room pressed against him. It was not the silence of fear, but of respect. Respect that had shifted away from him and towards Sundar and Lakhmi. Arvind leaned forward, his voice steady. Raghav, I once believed as you do, that strength was in power and respect in fear. But I have seen now with my own eyes that the deepest respect comes from humility. Perhaps it is time we rethink what it means to lead. Slowly, heads around the table nodded. The meeting moved on, but something had changed. Sundar's kindness, once questioned, had only grown stronger in the eyes of those present. When the gathering ended, Arvind walked alongside Sundar and Lakhmi. He could not hold back his thoughts any longer. What happened today? Arvind said. It opened my eyes again. I used to believe respect was something we demanded. But now I see it is something we earn through how we treat others. Sundar placed a hand gently on his shoulder. We are all still learning, Arvind. Even I. The real test of values is not when life is calm, but when they are challenged. Today, we were tested. Tomorrow, we may be tested again. Arvind nodded, his mind heavy, but his heart strangely light. He felt as if a door had opened within him, leading to a path he had not walked before. But little did they know, this path would not be smooth. Soon, they would face a moment where kindness would not just be a choice. It would be the only hope to bring light into darkness. When darkness arrived unexpectedly, a few weeks later, a large conference was held in a different city. It was not only a meeting of leaders, but also a gathering of young innovators, students, and dreamers who had come to listen, learn, and find inspiration. Sundar Pichai, Arvind Krishna, and Lakhmi Pichai were invited as special guests. The auditorium was grand, filled with thousands of people. Soft lights shone across the stage where the speakers would sit. The energy in the room was alive, buzzing with hope and curiosity. Yet beneath the excitement, there was also tension. Not everyone in the audience believed in kindness or humility. Some came with doubt, ready to question or even mock. When Sundar took his seat, the hall grew quieter. People leaned forward, eager to hear his words. Arvind sat beside him, his thoughts restless. He had grown close to Sundar and Lakhmi in the past weeks, and he admired their values. But part of him wondered how long such values could stand strong in a world that often rewarded harshness. The program began with speeches from other leaders. Some spoke about technology, some about growth. But when Sundar's turn came, something unusual happened. A man from the audience suddenly stood up and shouted, "Why should we listen to you? You speak about humility, but humility cannot feed families. Kindness cannot compete with power. You sit on a throne of privilege and tell us simple words. Do you think we are blind?" The room fell into uneasy silence. Security began to move toward the man, but Sundar raised his hand gently, asking them to stop. He looked at the man with calm eyes. "Please," Sundar said softly, "come forward and tell me what is in your heart." The man hesitated, surprised by the invitation. Slowly, he walked closer to the stage. His clothes were plain, his face tired. When he spoke again, his voice cracked with hidden pain. "My family lost everything. Last year," he said. "I work day and night, but no one respects me. People with power ignore us. When I hear you speak of kindness, I wonder if it is only a dream for people like us." I came today not to listen, but to see if there is any truth left in this world." The audience held their breath. Sundar stood and stepped down from the stage. He walked toward the man slowly, without fear, without distance. When he reached him, he placed his hand gently on the man's shoulder. "I cannot take away your pain in one moment," Sundar said, his voice steady. "But I can listen, I can respect you, and I can promise you this. Kindness is not a dream. It is real, and it begins when one person refuses to ignore another. Today, I refuse to ignore you." The man's eyes filled with tears. He had expected rejection, perhaps even humiliation. Instead, he was met with respect. The hall, which had been silent, now stirred with emotion. Some people wiped their eyes, quietly. Others shifted in their seats, as if they had been touched by a truth they had forgotten. Arvind Krishna sat frozen, his chest heavy with feeling. He had seen Sundar's kindness before, but this was different. This was not in a small, private room. This was in front of thousands, where humiliation could have been answered with pride. But Sundar had chosen humility again. Lakhmi Pichai watched her son from the side of the stage. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the deep weight of pride. She whispered to herself, "This is the real power. Not to rule, but to heal." The man, still trembling, whispered, "Thank you." Sundar nodded gently and guided him back to his seat. When Sundar returned to the stage, he did not continue with prepared notes. Instead, he spoke from the heart. "We live in a world where many are hurting," he said. "Some hide their pain behind pride, some behind anger, and some behind silence. But if we choose to meet that pain with kindness, we create respect that no force can destroy. Kindness is not weakness. It is the strength to remain human when the world tells you to. Forget." The audience broke into applause, not loud at first, but slowly rising until it filled the entire auditorium. It was not applause for a CEO, not applause for fame, but applause for truth. Arvind lowered his head, overwhelmed. In that moment, he realized something that shook him deeply. All his life, he had built walls of strength, but Sundar had shown him that true strength was not in walls, but in doors. Doors that opened to others, no matter how broken they were. And yet, as the applause faded, Arvind felt an unease he could not explain. He sensed that this journey of kindness was about to face even greater challenges. Challenges that would test not only Sundar, but everyone around him. When kindness met resistance, the days after the conference were filled with conversations. People spoke everywhere about what Sundar had done, how he had stepped down from the stage and treated a stranger with respect instead of anger. Some praised him, saying it showed true leadership. Others, however, began to whisper doubts. A group of critics gathered in private rooms, saying Sundar's approach was dangerous. "A leader cannot always bend to people's emotions," one of them said sharply. "If he shows weakness, others will use it against him." Another added, "Respect is not given freely. It must be commanded. Humility will make him a target." Their voices grew louder over the following weeks. Articles appeared questioning Sundar's choices. Some wrote that he was too soft for the ruthless world of global business. Others accused him of using humility as a mask, pretending to care. The same act that had inspired thousands now became the subject of criticism and attack. Arvind Krishna saw the change. He read the headlines, he heard the whispers, and he felt a storm gathering around his friend. Inside, Arvind battled with himself. Part of him wanted to believe that kindness would survive, but another part feared that the world would crush it. One evening, Arvind visited Sundar at his home. The house was quiet, filled with soft lights, not the grand halls people imagined a CEO would live in. Sundar sat with his mother, listening as she read from an old notebook of poems she loved. When Arvind entered, Lakhmi greeted him warmly and excused herself to the other room, leaving the two men alone. Arvind wasted no time. "Sundar," he said, "do you not see what is happening? People are beginning to turn your kindness into a weapon against you. They call it weakness. They twist your actions into something false. Are you not afraid?" Sundar looked calm, though his eyes revealed the weight he carried. "I know what they say," he replied softly, "but fear cannot guide my path. If I abandon kindness because the world mocks it, then kindness has no chance to live." Arvind leaned forward, his voice urgent. "But there are people in positions of power who want to see you fail. They are waiting for a mistake. What if they push harder? What if they create a storm too strong to stand against?" Sundar smiled gently. "Storms will always come, Arvind. But storms also pass. The question is not whether we face them, but whether we lose ourselves in fear when they arrive." Arvind fell silent. Part of him admired Sundar's calm, but part of him still trembled. He had lived long enough to know how cruel the world could be. The very next week, the storm arrived. During an important meeting with international leaders, Sundar's humility was directly attacked. One leader, a man known for his pride, raised his voice and said in front of everyone, "We cannot follow someone who bends before ordinary people. Leadership demands strength, not softness. If Sundar believes kindness is enough, let him prove it here and now." The room grew tense. All eyes turned to Sundar. Cameras were recording, news outlets were waiting to twist every word. The challenge was sharp and public. For a long moment, Sundar remained silent. Arvind, sitting nearby, felt his chest tighten. He feared Sundar would either stay quiet and be seen as weak or respond in anger and lose the respect he had built. But then Sundar spoke, his voice steady and calm. "Strength without respect destroys. Kindness without courage fades. True leadership is not choosing one or the other. It is carrying both together. I do not bend because I am weak. I bend because I refuse to break others." The hall froze. His words were simple, but they struck deeply. Even those who doubted him could not deny the quiet power behind them. Yet outside the hall, the criticism continued to grow. People argued on television, in articles, on the streets. Some said Sundar was redefining leadership for the better. Others said he was leading the world into danger with ideals that could not survive reality. That night, as Sundar sat quietly with his mother, Arvind stood at the window, staring into the dark city. He realized something he had never admitted before. This was not just about Sundar anymore. This was about all of them. About whether they believed that respect and kindness could truly stand against a world built on fear and pride. Arvind clenched, his fists. He admired Sundar, but he knew the storm was only growing stronger. Soon, a moment would come when even Sundar's kindness would be pushed to its breaking point. And in that moment, all of them would have to choose what they really believed in. When the heart was tested beyond limits, the storm that Arvind Krishna feared soon became real. A powerful decision had to be made, one that would affect thousands of people. The issue was complicated, involving jobs, resources, and the future of many families. Leaders from different nations gathered once again, and Sundar Pichai was asked to guide the discussion. The tension in the air was heavy. The world was watching, and every word spoken would carry consequences. Critics were waiting for Sundar to falter, eager to use his humility against him. Allies prayed for his strength. Arvind sat close by, his heart restless. And in the corner of the room, Lakhmi Pichai sat silently, her presence steady like a candle in the dark. As the meeting began, leaders argued fiercely. Some demanded quick, harsh solutions that would save money but hurt people. Others fought for profit without concern for the families that would be left behind. The voices grew louder, pride and ego filling the room. When it was Sundar's turn, he listened first, his hands folded calmly. Then he spoke softly, but his voice carried across the hall. "We are here not only to protect numbers, we are here to protect people. A decision that destroys lives cannot be called success." His words stirred the room, but not everyone was moved. One leader slammed his fist on the table. "Your kindness will ruin us," he shouted. "If we do not act with strength, we will fall behind. We cannot afford softness." The clash grew sharper. Accusations filled the air. Sundar remained calm, but Arvind could feel the pressure building. This was not just about values anymore. This was about power. Then the hardest blow came. One of the leaders, desperate to corner Sundar, pointed directly at him and said, "If you believe kindness is the path, then let us put it to a vote. If the majority chooses profit over people, will you step aside? Will you admit your way is a failure?" The challenge was brutal. It placed Sundar in a trap. If he agreed, he risked everything he believed in. If he refused, he would be accused of arrogance. The room held its breath. Cameras flashed. The world leaned closer to see how he would answer. Arvind's chest tightened. He wanted to protect Sundar, to speak for him. But something inside told him this was a test Sundar had to face alone. He glanced at Lakhmi. Her eyes were calm, filled not with fear but with quiet faith in her son. Sundar rose slowly from his chair. He did not raise his voice. He did not defend himself with pride. Instead, he said, "I will never step aside from kindness, because kindness is not mine to own. It belongs to all humanity. If you vote against it, you do not defeat me. You defeat yourselves. But if you choose it, you choose a future where respect is not an exception, but the rule." The room fell silent. His words were not sharp like swords, but they cut through pride like gentle rain breaking stone. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, unexpectedly, Arvind stood up. His voice trembled at first, but grew stronger. "I came here once doubting kindness," he confessed. "I thought humility was weakness, but I have seen with my own eyes that it is strength. Today, I stand with Sundar. I will not support decisions that destroy people for the sake of pride." All eyes turned to Arvind. His declaration shifted the air. Others, moved by his courage, began to murmur among themselves. Slowly, a few more voices rose in support. The vote was taken. Though many still resisted, the balance tilted. Enough leaders chose the path of protecting people, inspired not by force, but by respect. Sundar sat back down, calm as ever. But inside the room, something had changed. Arrogance had been met with humility, and for once, humility had not been crushed. It had stood tall. After the meeting, Arvind walked beside Sundar in silence. Finally, he said, "You carried the weight of every heart in that room, and yet you did not break. Sundar, you have taught me something I will never forget." Sundar smiled gently. "I only remembered what my mother taught me. Kindness is not a strategy. It is a way of living. It is not always easy, but it is always right." Lakhmi joined them quietly, her face glowing with pride. She placed her hand on both men's shoulders and said softly, "The world may not always reward kindness, but today it has been reminded that it still matters." Yet deep inside, Arvind sensed that the journey was not over. This victory was real, but the world was vast, and storms would come again. Still, for the first time in his life, he felt hope that kindness could truly endure, no matter the darkness it faced. The unforgettable truth. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Sundar, Arvind, or Lakhmi had ever seen. The story of the meeting spread across the world. People in small towns and great cities spoke of how humility had stood strong in the face of arrogance. Newspapers carried headlines that divided opinion. Some celebrated Sundar as a symbol of true leadership, while others still mocked him as too soft for the harsh demands of reality. But in homes, in schools, in places far from the eyes of cameras, the story touched ordinary people. Teachers spoke about it to their students, parents shared it with their children, and workers whispered about it during long shifts. The act of choosing people over profit had given them hope. Arvind Krishna found himself changing more than he ever thought possible. Once he had measured greatness by decisions, numbers, and titles. Now he measured it by how much respect a leader gave to even the smallest person in the room. He carried Sundar's words in his heart like a compass, guiding him quietly each day. One evening, Arvind visited Sundar and Lakhmi at their home. The three of them sat together under the soft glow of a single lamp. No grand speeches, no cameras, just three people bound by an unspoken truth. Arvind spoke softly, his voice steady, but filled with emotion. "I have lived much of my life chasing strength," Arvind said. "But today I realized strength was never about standing taller than others. It was about kneeling when others fell, about lifting them when they were broken. Sundar, you showed me this. And Lakhmiji, you are the root of it all." Sundar looked down humbly. Lakhmi placed her hand gently on Arvind's arm, her eyes filled with warmth. "Respect is not taught in speeches," she said softly. "It is planted in the heart and watered every day by how we treat others. I only planted the seed in Sundar. He chose to let it grow." Silence filled the room, but it was the kind of silence that healed rather than pressed. Arvind felt tears he could not hold back, but he did not hide them. He let them fall, because for the first time in his life he understood that tears were not weakness. They were proof of a heart still alive. Days later, Sundar was invited again to speak at a gathering filled with both supporters and critics. Arvind and Lakhmi stood quietly in the background. The hall was grand, yet it felt smaller than the weight of the moment. Sundar stepped to the front, and before he spoke, he looked out at the faces before him. Then he said in a calm, steady voice, "I have been called weak for choosing kindness. I have been called soft for choosing respect. But if weakness means to see the humanity in another person, then I will remain weak. If softness means to protect dignity over pride, then let me stay soft. Because in the end, the world will not remember our profits, our titles, or our pride. It will remember how we treated each other when no one else dared to care." His words sank into the hall like water into dry soil. There was no loud applause at first, only silence, deep, heavy, and full of reflection. Then, slowly, hands came together, rising into a wave of respect that filled the hall. Arvind turned to Lakhmi and whispered, "This moment, it will live forever. Not because Sundar is a CEO, but because he showed the world what it means to be human." Lakhmi's eyes glistened with tears, but her smile was steady. "Yes," she said, "and one day, people will remember not the arguments, not the criticism, but the truth. That kindness is the only strength that survives time." Hall erupted into applause, but Sundar did not stand taller. He bowed his head gently, humbly, as if to remind himself and everyone that greatness was not about standing above others. It was about standing with them. Outside, the world continued in its rush. But in that hall, hearts carried a memory that would not fade. Arvind knew he would carry it for the rest of his life. Lakhmi knew her son had fulfilled her deepest hope. And Sundar knew that even in storms, even in resistance, kindness had proven itself unshaken. And so the story closed, not with pride, but with humility. Not with victory shouted from rooftops, but with respect quietly written in the hearts of those who had seen, heard, and felt the unforgettable truth.